Rain lashed the roof shingles as Samantha sat watching the fireplace, seeking warmth that would not come. The night's restless sleep had brought no relief from the growing sense of unease knotting within. Flickering flames cast unsettling shadows across the dark study. This remote manor house had been the only shelter she and Caleb could find on their bleak, wind-swept island destination. At least here she could review her research on the third relic in solitude. Turning to the scattered pages on the heavy oak desk, Samantha sifted through what little information existed about the spiked iron scepter believed to reside somewhere on this island. As with the other relics, its origins were shrouded in mystery and folklore, hinting at a dark purpose. Local legend spoke of it being contained in an abbey built long ago atop a pagan site to contain its unholy energies. Samantha glanced at the crumbling journal page depicting the scepter. Iron spikes protruded at harsh angles from the rusted length of curved metal. Something about its twisted shape radiated malice. What she wouldn't give for a definitive location or any concrete facts about these artifacts. Each new discovery only unearthed more dark questions. The study door squeaked open, sending Samantha's pulse racing. She exhaled in relief as Caleb entered. The gaunt priest had been wandering the manor's empty halls since they arrived, often murmuring in his unfamiliar tongue. The rotting wood and pervasive damp could not be good for his deteriorating mental state. "Any revelations from your research, my dear?" Caleb's tone wavered between congeniality and condescension, leaving Samantha uneasy. She deflected his question with a forced smile. "Not much yet, but I was hoping we could cover more ground separately tomorrow. Why don't you search the coastline while I look around the old abbey ruins inland?" Caleb's eyes narrowed, flickering orange in the firelight. "Now, Samantha, we face grave danger roaming alone on this profane island. Have faith we shall overcome this trial together." He drifted closer, and Samantha tensed, gripping the iron fire poker. Caleb merely squeezed her shoulder with unnatural strength before gliding from the study, whispers trailing behind. Letting out a shaky breath, Samantha added more wood to the dying fire, watching the sparks dance. How much longer could she endure this? She had hired Caleb to help translate obscure rituals and icons, but over the past week he had grown increasingly erratic, treating her like a heretic resisting some foretold prophecy. She should cut him loose after they found the scepter. A blood-curdling scream jolted Samantha to her feet. It sounded like Caleb. She seized the fire poker and followed the faint sounds of a struggle toward the foyer. Chanting in that bizarre language echoed from the shadows as she approached. Heart-pounding, she burst into the room and gasped. There was no one there. Silence rang out, broken only by the wind's hollow moan. Samantha scanned the room wildly. "Caleb! Caleb!" She flicked the light switch to no effect. Of course, just her luck in this decrepit manor. Gripping the useless poker like a lifeline, she crept toward the ceremonial dagger they had left on the dusty table. If Caleb was in danger, she had to try and help. Floorboards creaked overhead. Samantha froze, barely breathing. Heavy footsteps slowly crossed the ceiling towards the adjoining hallway. She inched toward the door, poker raised, moving on a pure instinct. A faint orange light glowed beneath the doorway, flickering with a life of its own. Samantha steadied her nerve. She would get the drop on whoever or whatever was in there with Caleb. Samantha kicked the door open, poker swinging. "Get away from him, you bastard!" She choked off, eyes widening. The room was empty. No intruder, no Caleb. Only a broken window with wind-blown rain whipping the moth-eaten curtains. The dagger still lay untouched on the table next to a hand-scrawled note, weighted down by a small onyx statue. Samantha lowered the poker, cautiously approaching. The note was from Caleb in shaky but legible handwriting. "My dearest Samantha, my role in your journey has reached its end. I have been called to a higher purpose which you cannot yet understand. You must continue on alone. My spirit shall remain close. Onwards, my child." It was signed with a strange angular symbol rather than his name. Samantha's heartbeat quickened. Called? Was Caleb having some psychological break? She should try to find him before he got lost or hurt himself. She pocketed the note and headed toward the manor's main doors. As Samantha reached for the handle, the onyx statuette caught her eye. The jackal-headed deity seemed to sneer down at her with its carved ruby eyes. She hesitated, then grabbed the unsettling idol. If Caleb left it behind, he likely meant for her to have it. Hopefully he hadn't gotten far. Samantha stepped out into the storm's fury, shielding her face against stinging rain. She scanned the muddy grounds as lightning split the bruised black sky. No sign of Caleb down the winding dirt path through the gnarled trees. She followed the trail toward a crumbling stone structure in the distance that must be the old abbey. Its spire flickered like a shadowy claw each time lightning struck. If Caleb sought the scepter, that's where he'd go. Mud sucked at Samantha's boots as she trudged onward through the tempest. A prickling dread gnawed at her insides. Each flash of lightning seemed to illuminate things scurrying just out of sight in the underbrush. She clutched the statuette like a talisman, focusing ahead. Finally, she reached the abbey entrance, a cavernous arched wooden door. It creaked open just enough for her to slip through into the dark, stale interior. Flicking on a flashlight, she saw debris littering the cracked stone floor. Faded murals depicting robed figures cowering before a winged, horned entity covered the walls. This had been a place of worship, but for what god? "Caleb?" Samantha's hoarse voice echoed unanswered. She moved further inward, sweeping her light over the ransacked pews and toppled candelabras of that main chapel. At the far end loomed a rotting oak altar engraved with unsettling symbols. She imagined robed cultists gathered before it in malign ritual, faces obscured beneath hoods. A shattered, stained glass image of the jackal deity Akaro sneered down from above. No sign of Caleb here either. Samantha's light fell upon a small iron-banded door nearly hidden behind the decrepit altar. Carvings of skeletal hands clawing from the earth framed the periphery. Her blood ran cold. This had to lead to the scepter. She steeled her nerve and heaved the door open on protesting rusted hinges. A choking waft of stale air rushed out as she gazed down the worn stone steps, disappearing into unfathomable darkness. She had no choice but to follow, for answers and for Caleb. Samantha descended into the frigid black, probing each out-of-sight step with her foot. She strained to hear any sound of Caleb over her own sputtering breath and the pounding of blood in her ears. Time lost meaning in the disorienting void. After an eternity, Samantha's light revealed the passage's end, a horrific chamber that must have been the abbey crypt. Human remains littered the dirt floor, still chained to the walls in ragged clothes. Samantha gagged on the stale scent of decay. Many of the bones seemed scarred by blade marks, as if defleshed while their hosts still lived. What nightmares had this place witnessed? A metal scrape redirected the flashlight beam. At the back of the crypt sat a large iron coffin engraved with a huge pentagram. The source of the sound, its heavy lid slowly opening. Samantha stood paralyzed. A deformed hand shot out from the darkness within, clutching the edge. Samantha backpedaled, tripping over skeletal remains. She watched in horror as a hunched figure crawled from the coffin's confines, concealed in a filthy shroud. It shambled toward her, letting out an inhuman death rattle. Samantha screamed as she searched desperately for anything to defend herself. Her hand brushed against a femur bone. Weapon in hand, Samantha swung at the creature as it lunged, hitting only air as it dissolved into wisps of inky smoke. She collapsed against the cold, gritty wall, breathing raggedly as the smoke wafted into cracks between the stone. A nightmare. It had to be. Samantha forced herself to examine the open coffin, wary of any further attack. The iron scepter lay within, just as the legends promised. She reached cautiously for the ancient relic, focused on finally completing her task. The heavy stone lid suddenly slammed down, trapping Samantha's hand between it and the rim. She shrieked in agony, feeling the crush of iron against fragile bone. Desperately, she pushed against the lid to no effect. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as she struggled to brace herself with her free arm, but the lid had her pinned tightly in its merciless grip. "Caleb, help, please," Samantha cried hoarsely between shuddering waves of pain, unsure if he could even hear her. Sinister whispers echoed around the chamber, seeming to mock her desperation. Darkness crept in at the edges of Samantha's vision as her strength faded. She was going to die here, sealed away like those poor souls chained to these walls. As Samantha slipped into delirium, she thought she glimpsed a robed skeletal figure drift closer, its face hidden in shadows. Darkness took her. Cold, shocking pain jolted Samantha awake with a gasp. The heavy lid had risen just enough for her mangled hand to slip free, leaving smears of blood on the iron rim. She clutched her wrist, breathing raggedly as she fought to stay conscious against the renewed throbbing. How was she still alive? Gritting her teeth, Samantha grabbed the scepter with her good hand and stumbled away from the cursed coffin just as the lid slammed down once more. She tripped again over bones, crashing to the dirt. Her only thought through the haze of pain was getting out of this hellish place. Clutching the scepter in her blooded grip, Samantha staggered up the worn steps. She emerged gasping into the main chapel's stale air. A clap of thunder shook the mouldering walls. She had to find shelter before she lost consciousness. Heavy rain drenched Samantha as she limped from the abbey ruins. A flash of lightning illuminated the graveyard's cracked tombstones, now choked by weeds. But they seemed somehow different than before. Sinister humanoid shapes lurked amongst the graves, drifting steadily closer. The specters silently surrounded her, eyeless faces leering hungrily. Samantha brandished the scepter, its iron spikes glinting wetly in the gloom. "Stay back, I'm warning you!" Her ragged voice betrayed her terror. The phantom horde closed in like actors in a grim play. A blaze of white light pierced the darkness, scattering the wraiths into nothingness with an unearthly wail. Caleb stood at the tree line, clutching a lantern carved with arcane symbols. His sunken eyes reflected the lamplight with a dark fervor. "We must hurry!" He roughly grabbed Samantha's good arm, half dragging her along the muddy path. Samantha barely registered the jostling pain or rain mixing with blood. Her vision narrowed to the lantern's pure glow, banishing the swirling shadows. They reached the manor and Caleb sat Samantha before the hearth, procuring bandages to tightly bind her mangled hand. His movements seemed bestial yet steady. She focused on each bite of pain, using it to stay present when her mind threatened to slip into shock. The events blurred, Caleb setting her hand with splints cut from old chairwood, chanting strange words over the scepter, force-feeding her bitter liquid from a flask. At some point he had retrieved the other two relics. Samantha's eyelids grew leaden. She had done her part in this madness. All three were found. Now she desperately needed rest. Samantha's dreams were haunted by visions of the scepter morphing into a slithering viper and an emaciated jackal-headed entity clawing up from a red desert to cloak the world in a second darkness. She awoke to morning light spearing her throbbing eyes, for now the shadows had released their grip. But as Samantha gazed upon the three relics laid out on the desk, she knew their power still lay shrouded in darkness. And she was bound to see their hidden purpose through to the end. Samantha stared out the jet's window at the jungle canopy stretching to the horizon below. They had come full circle back to where her twisted path began weeks ago, the overgrown temple in Guatemala. So much had changed since she first discovered that cursed tomb and its inscriptions of an ancient evil. Now she returned with Caleb and three unearthed relics tied to ritual resurrection. But her understanding had not grown, only her dread. Caleb's murmured prayers broke the tense silence. He seemed transformed since retrieving the scepter, carrying himself with single-minded conviction. His fervent rantings about fulfilling destiny had disrupted their travel, but Samantha was just glad of his protection on this final, unnerving leg. She needed Caleb functional, at least until this was over. As the plane landed, Samantha braced herself to face the darkness one last time. She focused on her purpose here, stopping whatever malevolent force she had unwittingly awakened. Once she performed the banishment ritual etched on the temple walls, her role in this nightmare would end. Jungle heat smothered Samantha as she retraced the overgrown path to the ruins with Caleb trailing close behind. Vines and roots now almost completely ensnared the decrepit pyramid, like the forest was swiftly erasing any trace of its existence. But etched memories could not be so easily banished. After painstaking descent through the narrow crevice, Samantha and Caleb stood before the looming obsidian sarcophagus in the ritual chamber's stifling air. Dread flooded her being. The last time she stood here, the casket had been mysteriously empty. She prayed it would remain so. Samantha photographed the banishment ritual's glyphs, then positioned the three relics around the altar as depicted. Caleb began lighting iron braziers at the chamber's shadowed corners, chanting under his breath as he worked. Samantha focused on her task, though his ominous words grated her nerves. Soon this would be finished. She reviewed the incantation text, sounding out the cryptic phrases of an ancient tongue. As she recited, Caleb unexpectedly joined in synchronized rhythm, as if he had known the words all along. Samantha faltered. How? Suspicion flared, but the chanting continued, louder now, the foreign syllables echoing cacophonously between the stones. Violent tremors rocked the temple without warning. Dust rained down and cracks spiderwebbed the walls. A resonant howl like a roaring wind rose within the chamber. Hieroglyphs depicting Akoro began glowing blood red, pulsating in time with the quaking earth. Fear seized Samantha in icy claws. "What's happening?" Caleb stood, arms raised in exultation, shadows writhing at his feet. Strange symbols glowed beneath his skin like brands. "Yes, the ritual has begun," he arises. The obsidian casket visibly lurched atop the altar. Horrible cracking sounds came from within as its carved face contorted in rage. Ancient seals were breaking. Samantha's mind reeled with confusion and panic. Had the incantation triggered this? She grabbed Caleb's arm, shaking the entranced man violently. "What have you done? We need to leave!" He shoved her back with terrible strength, eyes burning. "Our destiny is at hand. Do not fear the darkness." Samantha tasted blood where she had bitten her lip in the fall. This was wrong. She scanned the chaotic chamber desperately, looking for anything to help reverse what had been awakened. Her eyes fell upon strange, unlit twin braziers flanking the altar, too far for the ritual fire to ignite. She recalled them from the ritual glyphs. They were meant to activate a counter-curse. It was their only hope. Dodging falling stones, Samantha snatched a flaming branch from the nearest brazier. She rushed the altar, only to be seized from behind by Caleb, ethereal tendrils swirling around his arms. His grip crushed the air from her lungs as he sought to restrain her. "You cannot stop what comes!" Samantha drove her elbow backward into his gut, breaking the hold. She sprinted the last steps and touched flame to both braziers. Caleb roared in fury, blurring forward with impossible speed, but it was too late. The counterspell had taken spark. Blinding azure light erupted, knocking him back into the shattered wall. The chamber rumbled with the force of a titan's heartbeat. Samantha's pulse pounded in her ears, louder than the quaking earth. She faced the altar, ready to confront whatever horror crawled forth from that lidded coffin to hell. This would end now. An ear-splitting crack resounded through the chamber. The obsidian casket's stone face suddenly exploded outwards in jagged shards. A sinister, inhuman shriek followed, laced with unbridled fury and sadistic anticipation. She stood frozen. This was no decrepit mummy, it was a monster! The abyssal entity reared to its full imposing height. Curved ram horns framed its elongated jackal head, and bat-like wings flexed, smashing the relics aside. It opened its maw, unleashing an unnatural roar that shook Samantha to her core. The creature turned toward her with murderous intent, poisonous claws raised to strike. Samantha trembled, all her courage draining away. How could she possibly stand against this primal horror, this evil incarnate? She sank to her knees, sobbing in utter despair before the demon's wrath. A blaze of light and searing heat erupted between Samantha and the monster. Caleb stood with arms outstretched, ring of holy fire encircling the fiend. "You shall not claim her, beast! The Lord compels you!" Caleb shouted arcane words, binding the creature in radiant chains. It shrieked and thrashed against its burning bonds. Samantha stared wide-eyed from the dirt. Caleb had saved her? She watched him stand resolute against the demon's fury, etched sigils glowing upon his flesh. He turned and extended a hand. "Samantha, the incantation, now!" Jolted from her stupor, Samantha grabbed the ritual page. Her shaking hands could barely hold the text. She faced the inferno raging at the altar's heart, beast silhouetted within. "You can do this. End what you began." Samantha recited the banishment chant once more, voice raw with emotion. The brazier's azure flames surged higher in response, bathing the chamber in purifying light. The chained demon howled as the ritual words struck like blades, carving sins into its writhing form. Dark fissures split the stone floor, belching sulphurous smog. A pulsing orb of liquid shadow formed before the creature's palm, boiling and growing within its claws. Hell light burned in its gaze. With a roar, it hurled the concentrated darkness straight at Samantha. Caleb leapt forth, intercepting the orb's path. It sank into his chest, scorching sigils from the inside out. He cried out, collapsing limply between Samantha and the fiend. Samantha cradled Caleb's burned body, tears falling upon his ravaged face. His fingers twitched, still clutching worn rosary beads. She laid him gently down and rose, glaring with righteous fury. The creature sneered, flexing against dimming bands. It had taken so much, but no more. Samantha snatched up the iron scepter and approached the altar as the final words left her lips. The relics resonated with power, shaking free of corruption. Inscribed runes ignited along the scepter's length as Samantha raised it high. "With light cast into darkness, your reign ends." She slammed the scepter down. Blinding rays pierced the demonic form from within, burning away the clinging shadows. It let out an agonized scream as flesh sloughed from bone. Samantha channeled all her grief and rage through the relic. "Go back to hell where you belong!" With a brilliant flash, the creature exploded into dust. The light contracted inward, shooting down through the cracks in the earth until only flickering braziers lit the silent chamber. Samantha fell to her knees, scepter clattering down. It was over. She had won. So why did victory feel so hollow? She crawled to where Caleb lay, his breathing shallow and erratic. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth as he struggled to speak. Samantha clutched his charred hand. "Just hold on. I can get you help. Please don't leave." Caleb's glassy eyes drifted over her shoulder. He seemed to stare at something beyond sight. "Faith can redeem any sin if given freely." He exhaled one last time with the barest hint of a smile. The rosary went still. Samantha bowed her head, allowing herself to weep openly. She had lost so much to this senseless evil, but Caleb had given himself so she could defeat it. He had done what she could not muster, faith till the end. She would honor that sacrifice, starting now. Gently closing Caleb's unseeing eyes, Samantha lifted his body and began the long ascent out of the silent ruins. She walked with calm purpose. There would be no more looking back, no more running. The future waited above, where light still shone as darkness fell. A sense of unfinished business clung to Samantha like the airport crowd jostling for position around her. She adjusted the backpack containing the 3 collected relics, unable to ignore their weight. The scepter, dagger and jewel had been recovered with sacrifices she did not take lightly. Now they must be returned to their secret resting places so their malignant power could never be misused. Father Caleb's absence at her side carried an even heavier weight. His devotion had enabled victory over the evil presence in that jungle tomb, but at great cost. Samantha still struggled to reconcile her last memories of him possessed by fanatical purpose with the selfless man who gave his life to redeem her own. She could only honor him by finishing what they started. Hunching her shoulders, Samantha maneuvered towards the terminal gate. She had hoped to avoid notice, but a tall, bald man in dark sunglasses scrutinized her from nearby, setting her nerves on edge. When she glanced back, he was gone. With a weary sigh, she joined the boarding line, ready to be done with this final task. Settling into her window seat as the plane reached cruising altitude, Samantha closed her eyes, seeking peace she could not find. What came next after this chapter of darkness ended? Would the shadows in her dreams ever fade? She opened her eyes to dispel the visions and froze. There, across the aisle, sat the same bald man in sunglasses, intently watching her. Samantha turned quickly away, pulse racing. Surely it was coincidence? A few hours later, she stirred to a tense hush filling the cabin. Passengers whispered and glanced around nervously. What was happening? Samantha tried to peer past a broad-shouldered man in the aisle seat, but only glimpsed the first-class curtains. A strange glow emanated from within. Without warning, the entire plane rattled violently. Loose items flew as the cabin tilted and dipped. Terrified passengers grabbed their seats, oxygen masks dangling uselessly. Samantha tasted bile at the back of her throat. This was no normal turbulence. An engine must be damaged, she thought, frantically gasping through another sickening alert. A blood-curdling scream came from first class, followed by angry shouts in a language Samantha now knew too well. No, it couldn't be. The bald man was suddenly flung backwards through the curtains, slamming against the cabin roof. As he crumpled to the floor, his human guise melted away. Dark flames wreathed the inhuman form of the temple demon she had banished. It crouched, obsidian claws gouging the carpeted floor. Empty white eyes found Samantha. With a fanged grin, it rose to its full imposing height. Bloody symbols glowed on its chest beneath tattered robes. The nearby passengers recoiled in stunned horror and fear. The freed demon snarled, lashing the air with a clawed hand. A wave of devastating force shredded the main exit. Howling wind sucked a screaming man through the gaping hole. The plane's nose dipped violently. Samantha glanced outside and saw Atlantic waves churning just below through gaps in the shredded hull. "We're going down!" She looked towards the creature, now stalking the aisle, savoring mortal panic. She had no relics or rituals to stop it this time. They were utterly doomed unless she tried something, anything. Steeling herself, Samantha stepped into the main aisle, blocking its path. "You have no power over this place, demon!" she shouted above the roaring wind, meeting its baleful gaze. It paused, head tilting with interest. Strange whispers drifted around it. With frightening speed, the demon seized Samantha by the neck, lifting her effortlessly. Smoke curled where its clutch seared her skin. "You lost the moment you freed me from that accursed tomb, mortal," it growled. "Now I will finish what I began centuries ago." Samantha clawed frantically at the crushing grip, feet dangling above the slanted floor. This was the end. She regretted unraveling this evil and could only pray someone else might seal it once more in the future. Samantha closed her eyes as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. A flash of steel flickered in the chaotic dimness. The demon howled in rage and surprise, dropping Samantha. She crumpled to her hands and knees, gasping painfully. The blessed dagger jutted from the demon's shoulder, foul ichor pouring from the wound. Father Caleb stood before it, frost-rimmed robes snapping violently in the wind.